This week's episode is sponsored by Easy Roller Dice and their new Color Spray Dice Kickstarter.
These affordable, colorful, and high-quality dice are perfect for building a personalized dice collection on a lightweight budget.
The campaign aims to unlock 20 unique color and font combinations, so you can have the perfect set to match your characters, spells, and monsters.
There's also add-ons available for Easy Roller Dice Company's trays and cases. We've been using their dice trays for years now at our game table to keep all our dice all together in the same place.
Visit EasyRollerDice.com or follow the links in the description below to get in on their Kickstarter. And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are taking an in-depth look at how to play an Eldritch Knight in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
The Eldritch Knight combines sword and sorcery in a way that not many other classes can. And today we're going to look at some of the amazing class features and abilities and spell choices that can make your Eldritch Knight stand out on the battlefield.
There's a lot to discuss with this truly awesome and fun fighter subclass, so let's get rolling.
The Eldritch Knight is a subclass option available for fighters when you reach 3rd level, so let's go over the abilities that you gain by choosing this amazing subclass.
So, the iconic ability of the Eldritch Knight is that you will gain the Spellcasting class feature. This class feature is extremely limited compared to full spellcasting classes like the Sorcerer and Wizard, and even much more restricted than the spellcasting available to the Paladin and the Ranger. The Eldritch Knight, over the course of its career, gains a couple cantrips and will learn a handful of spells from the wizard spell list, but largely restricted to the spells of the school of evocation and abjuration. Over the course of your career, you will only learn up to 4th level spells and gain 4th level spell slots. In fact, only getting those very high level spell slots at the very end of the game once you've reached very high levels.
As an Eldritch Knight, your spellcasting ability modifier that you're using is intelligence, which means that the fighters do have to make this decision on whether they want to focus on their strength or dexterity, their constitution, and now also adding intelligence into that. Of course, the fighter is already such a strong combatant that even peppering in a little bit of magic can amplify them in a large way.
Fighters are not always known for having particularly high intelligence scores, so it can be very difficult to determine exactly how to balance your stats when you're playing an Eldritch Knight. Fortunately, a lot of really fantastic spells available to Eldritch Knights don't rely on attack rolls and don't rely on your spell saving throw DC being very high, particularly many of the defensive spells from the Abjuration School of Magic. So it is completely possible to build an Eldritch Knight with a middling intelligence score and simply choosing spells very carefully so you never have to really worry about your low attack bonus or spell saving throw DC.
We will be going level by level and talking about the spells that we love for the Eldritch Knight, but first let's talk about the abilities you gain as you level up in this subclass. At 3rd level, you gain Weapon Bond, which allows you to magically bond with up to 2 weapons. When you are bonded with a weapon, you cannot be disarmed of that weapon, and if you don't have the weapons in your hand, you can summon them into them as a bonus action on your turn. This is actually really cool for situations that can come up in a lot of D&D campaigns where you might be without your weapons and things go south. Being able to summon these weapons into your hand, or if somebody tries to steal them from you, they just can't. So you are never without an option to get ready for combat.
It also lets you feel a little bit like Thor, causing your thrown weapon to fly right back into your hand, and it's actually quite effective when used with thrown weapons such as hammers, axes, and javelins, particularly magic ones that don't necessarily return to your hand automatically after you throw them. You can throw the weapon and then use your weapon bond ability to call it right back to your hand.
At 7th level, you gain War Magic, which means that if you cast a cantrip on your turn, you can use your bonus action to make an attack. This can be really helpful for the fact that you are going to have some awesome cantrips at your disposal, but you are also a fighter, and being able to make attacks is pretty important.
Yeah, we'll talk about how to combine this feature with some of the great cantrips in the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide once we get to our spells section.
At 10th level, you're going to gain Eldritch Strike, which allows you to, if you hit a target with an attack, they now have disadvantage against the next spell saving throw that they have to make against a spell that you cast before the end of your next turn. This works really well if you decide to hit them with an attack and then action surge to cast a spell at them.
This makes a fantastic 1-2 punch, whether you're slashing away at your enemies and then slamming them with a fireball, or being a little bit more crafty at higher levels of play, where you attack a key foe and then use banishment against them.
At 15th level, you're going to gain Arcane Charge, which further enhances your action surge ability, allowing you to teleport up to 30 feet before or after your action surge action. This is an awesome ability because it actually allows you to add extra mobility to your Eldritch Knight.
Finally, at 18th level, you gain Improved War Magic. Now, when you cast a spell, you can then use your bonus action to make an attack. Rather than being just a cantrip triggering this ability, it's now any spell that you cast permits you to make another bonus action attack as a follow-up. Overall, I think both War Magic and Improved War Magic are difficult abilities to use. I think that with the fighter's bonus feats and the extra attacks that they make on their turn, a lot of the time, even an Eldritch Knight is going to want to be fighting and fighting hard with all of their extra attacks.
The hard part is that as a fighter, you're going to be gaining more and more ways to attack. And to remove those with the option to cast a spell is a hard gamble that you're going to have to make sure is going to pay off in the right way. There are lots of ways to do that as an Eldritch Knight, but it is always weighing those options of getting multiple attacks or just landing a good spell and making one solid attack as your bonus action.
In general, a damage-dealing cantrip will deal less damage than the fighter can deal with their regular attacks. Particularly, once they get the War Magic ability, you've already got extra attack. So you're choosing, am I going to make 2 attacks or a cantrip and a bonus action attack? Well, of course, fighters might also want to take feats such as Polearm Master and Crossbow Expert, or be dual wielders, and have lots of ways to be able to attack with their bonus actions anyways. So it's a little bit of a trade-off as to whether or not this is the best strategy to use. I like to think of it as a nice perk, but I wouldn't necessarily always want to be taking advantage of War Magic in every single round after round after round of attacking. I think more often than not, as an Eldritch Knight, you want to find ways of using your actions and bonus actions to get some cool spells off, and then still being able to make lots of attacks as a fighter, because the fighter, particularly once you get to 11th level and higher levels when you get that 3rd and 4th attack, it's really at a premium to use your main action to do that.
So I think that all of these abilities that the Eldritch Knight gains are just icing. They complement the theme and style of an Eldritch Knight really well. They implement this sort of diversity in being able to do magic and also attack. But the real delicious cake of this class is being able to cast spells in general. That's really why we're here, and that's what's going to make this a standout option for a subclass.
One of the strategies, though, that I will always point out that is super important with the Eldritch Knight is that fighter's action surge ability. The ability to make a full set of attacks with your action and then action surge to cast another spell is a really great 1-2 punch. But there's another important rules note that we should mention with regards to the Eldritch Knight. If you're an Eldritch Knight of, say, 14th level and you've got access to Fireball, on your turn, if you want to, you can cast Fireball with your action surge, and Fireball once again. This is because there is not a restriction on casting more than one spell per turn, as long as you're using actions to do so. The restriction about spellcasting only applies when you cast a spell using a bonus action. So the Eldritch Knight doesn't have any way to cast a spell as a bonus action. So as long as you're action surging, you can in fact cast 2 spells on your turn, one with your main action and one with your action surge action. And this kind of double Fireball nuke is a nice little strategy to have in your back pocket.
While we're discussing amazing strategies for the Eldritch Knight, let's talk about all the great spell choices and how they can impact the way we play this subclass.
So first of all, we want to pick our cantrips. Eldritch Knights learn 2 cantrips at 3rd level when they take the subclass, and will gain only 1 more additional cantrip once you reach 10th level. So it's pretty limited here. So you better pick some good ones.
The other hard part is that most cantrips are, once again, not going to deliver on the damage output that just making a bunch of attacks will. So using an action to cast a cantrip and then making a bonus action attack might not give you the same output that you were hoping for from a fighter class. So the question becomes, do you really want to look at damage dealing options, or is this a better place to take utility cantrips?
I don't think taking Shocking Grasp or Firebolt or Ray of Frost are the best options for an Eldritch Knight. I think that your melee and ranged attacks are better and more reliable than using your valuable and restricted cantrip slots on those spells specifically. I think I'd be really tempted to take something like Mage Hand, but the real gold here are the cantrips from the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide.
It's really hard to ignore that the spells like Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade are perfect for the Eldritch Knight and feel like they were in fact made for them. They were actually made for the Blade Singer, but they are just absolutely phenomenal for an Eldritch Knight to pick up.
It's important to know that you are still casting a spell, not taking the attack action when you use these spells. So that means that things like Extra Attack, Two-Weapon Fighting, Polearm Master, and Crossbow Expert that would let you make another attack as part of that action or an attack as your bonus action will not be triggered. But you could, say, apply Great Weapon Master to the attack that you make with that cantrip. And of course, once you reach 7th level, casting these cantrips will trigger War Magic. And I think from 7th level to 10th level, casting Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade and then bonus action attacking is a really nice 1-2 punch. You're getting the same number of attacks that you would with Extra Attack. You're getting a little bit of bonus damage from the cantrip. It's a nice little combo.
Yeah, it still does have that question of whether it's more worth it to dish out all of your attacks or cast one of these spells. And you'll have to weigh those options from turn to turn. But these are a really nice way to implement magic into the way that you're attacking and can give you some really cool options for perhaps opportunity attacks if you were to take something like the Warcaster feat or the Sentinel feat.
We'll come back to those when we talk about our feats after the spells. As we move into the leveled spells, we are now restricted from choosing not just spells from the Wizard class spell list, but for the most part, we can only select spells of the schools of Abjuration and Evocation. At 1st level, 8th level, 14th level, and again at 20th level, we can choose one spell from any school of magic that's still on the Wizard class spell list. So we want to keep in mind that we're mostly restricted to these two schools of magic as we choose our spells, but also be thinking about the exceptions that can really add to our arsenal.
So while we look at 1st level spells, keep in mind again that damage dealing spells might not be the greatest option because you already have great ways to deal damage as a fighter. But instead looking for ways to augment or change your position on the battlefield or what you can do on your turn with your attacks is the really interesting thing we want to look at. And some of my favorite options are spells like Shield or Absorb Elements. Shield will allow you to be able to stand up to tougher foes and increase that AC in a pinch when needed, making you more robust on the battlefield. And Absorb Elements, again, both of these being reactionary spells, allows you to take in incoming damage and then dish it out furthermore when you deal damage on your turn. Both of these work really well with an Eldritch Knight.
And they're both Abjuration spells, so they're perfect picks. I don't know if I would take Burning Hands or Chromatic Orb or other attack-based spells with my Eldritch Knight. I think probably I'm going to gravitate towards taking those two and then loading up my 1st level spell with Find Familiar. Much like the Arcane Trickster, I think you gain so much as an Eldritch Knight from having a familiar. If you're curious as to all the amazing things that you can do with your familiar, check out our dedicated video on that right up over here. But suffice to say, a familiar adds so much role-playing opportunities and utility both in and out of combat that it's really hard to not make this your outside school spell that you choose right away at 3rd level.
When we move on to 2nd level spells, this is a pretty sad area for the Eldritch Knight. The only Abjuration spell available at 2nd level to the Wizard school is going to be Arcane Lock, which is not going to help you in pretty much any circumstances.
On the evocation side of things, they don't look too much better. You're a 7th level character at this point, which means that the damage of spells like Scorching Ray, Shatter, and Melf's Acid Arrow really just aren't that impressive compared to the damage that you can already do with your melee and ranged attacks. And while Darkness is an evocation spell, the Eldritch Knight doesn't have any ability to see in the area of their own darkness. I think that you can get a little bit of utility out of a spell like Warding Wind, which is a pretty interesting evocation spell that can protect you against ranged attacks. And then you got to make the really hard choice of what your out-of-school 2nd level spell is going to be, which is going to be pretty agonizing because there's a lot of really good options here. They're just not from Abjuration and Evocation.
I do think that maybe if you are playing a strictly melee version of the Eldritch Knight, it might be nice to have something like Scorching Ray in those cases where you're fighting a flying foe and can't get to them. There are reasons why having a ranged attack that is maybe better than just shooting it with a bow could be a good option here. But again, it's a pretty tough call, and a lot of these don't necessarily augment the Eldritch Knight in a way that really benefits them beyond what they can already do.
That said, I think one of the best choices for an Eldritch Knight to take for their 2nd level spell out of school is Misty Step to give you a bonus action teleport. And you can pretty comfortably use all your 2nd level spell slots on Misty Step and come out far ahead. You might also want to consider something like Mirror Image if you're on the front lines, because that gives you a great defensive buff as well. Those would be my top 2 picks. It's a really hard choice of which to take, though.
As we move on to 3rd level, we come back with some great spell options here like Fireball and Counterspell. Now, we have mentioned that maybe damage dealing spells aren't the forte of an Eldritch Knight, but having an AoE spell like Fireball can take care of a lot of little enemies very quickly, which is something that you may have a challenge doing with other options. And not to mention Counterspell, just being able to undo enemy wizards will save your party time and time again.
But the real gold here is the 14th level pick for Haste. You want to take this because it just gives you so much to cast it on yourself. You're going to get bonuses to your speed. You're going to get bonuses to your armor class. And best of all, you're going to be able to make an additional melee or ranged attack when you take the attack action. It is so phenomenal to have this. It comes online at 14th level, which is a fantastic augmentation because you're really going to make yourself into a damage dealing powerhouse by bringing your own haste spell.
Most fighters are going to have good constitution, which means that you can hopefully make those concentration checks, because casting haste on yourself is phenomenal, but also puts you in the danger zone because you're the one who's going to be in close combat with the enemies.
And finally, we come to the 4th level spell slot. Eldritch Knights do not get their 4th level spell slot until they reach 19th level, and they only get 1 spell slot, although you can learn more than 1 4th level spell. So you better make it a critical pick, because it's going to have to be a powerful spell to have an impact at this level of play.
One of the best options here for a 4th level spell might be Banishment. If you pair that with the Eldritch Strike ability, this means that you're going to give disadvantage on the saving throw, giving you a good chance to end a combat encounter.
Now, I think you might also be tempted to take a spell like Dimension Door to get a nice teleport in the mix, or you might even consider a spell like Fire Shield, which is a spell that doesn't require concentration but lasts an hour, but will give you resistance to cold or fire damage and cause damage to anybody that hits you with a melee attack while the spell is active. Overall, the 4th level spell slots are not super impactful, and they come online pretty late, that I would just take the 4th level spell that you think is the coolest one, and hopefully you get to do something super cool like banishing the enemy with your Eldritch Strike, or managing to have that nice defensive bulwark with Fire Shield.
So now that we've talked about some of the great spells to choose, let's mention some of the feats that are going to help augment the spell choices even further. And I think we have to say that Warcaster is almost essential for an Eldritch Knight, because Eldritch Knights do have the problem of having weapons in their hands, or if you want to carry a shield, it might be difficult to cast some of your spells. But adding Warcaster into the mix not only allows you to do this, but it also allows you to do some lovely things like being able to cast spells as an opportunity attack, which does pair really well with some of the core class abilities that you gain as an Eldritch Knight.
Most spellcasters take Warcaster simply because they want to get advantage on their concentration checks. And as an Eldritch Knight, you might pick up a few key concentration spells, but there's actually not too many for you to choose at all. The last ability of Warcaster, which allows you to cast a spell instead of making an opportunity attack, is something that a fighter Eldritch Knight can really take advantage of because you're right at the front lines and enemies are often going to be provoking opportunity attacks. One of my favorite ways and simplest ways to use this is simply with Booming Blade. If an enemy is provoking an opportunity attack from you, it usually means that they're moving away from you. So you hit them with Booming Blade, and not only do they take the additional damage from your attack, but they also move from their space. So they take the extra damage immediately from Booming Blade too. It's a nice, really solid hit. And we can do a little bit better than that too. Because once we have Warcaster and Booming Blade together, we can also take other feats like Sentinel and Polearm Master that give us different ways to make opportunity attacks, and then use Booming Blade in place of that as well. It's important to know that Booming Blade does have a 5-foot range, so if you are using it with Polearm Master, you still have to be aware of the range, because if the enemy's 10 feet away, it's not going to work. With the other features, you get a really, really nice battlefield tactic that you can use.
Honestly, the pairing of Sentinel and Warcaster alone is great. It just gives the Eldritch Knight a lot of other opportunities to not only cast spells, but also dish out attacks, both of which are powerful points for the Eldritch Knight. So just by combining those two, you're going to have a lot more options on the battlefield.
Sentinel also allows you to reduce a creature's speed to 0 if you hit them with an opportunity attack. But again, if you choose to cast a spell because you have Warcaster instead of making an opportunity attack, you've now not made an opportunity attack, you've cast a spell, so it won't reduce their speed to 0, which is actually something that you want them to be able to continue moving if you're going to hit them with Booming Blade. So just be aware that there's a lot of really weird rules interactions and a whole slew of exceptions that happen if you are taking Warcaster, Sentinel, and Polearm Master, and it's really worthwhile just talking about it as a group with your Dungeon Master and making sure that everybody's on the same page about how all this stuff works, because we get confused by it.
Eldritch Knights have the benefits of really working well with any sort of weapon combination that suits your style. Whether you want to be a sword and board or have a great weapon or fight as an archer, there are a lot of options to help augment that as well. When we look at feats like Sharpshooter or Great Weapon Master, these might be awesome pickups depending on the playstyle you are going in for. At the end of the day, the Eldritch Knight adds so many great options of mixing the spellcasting and the combat prowess that already exists in the fighter. By adding the spellcasting into that, you're just going to change and shape the way that the fighter works on the battlefield in new and interesting ways. And with the versatility of spells that you can take and the way that they can play with some of the core features of this class is just really exciting and fun to experiment with when you're playing Dungeons & Dragons.
The Eldritch Knight's features build on the fantastic core that the fighter class offers. And so whether you're choosing spells to give you new options in battle like throwing fireballs and casting counterspells, or you're just using a couple well-chosen spells like Shield and Absorb Elements to give you some extra defensive tricks, the Eldritch Knight really augments what the fighter is capable of and is a really fun class to play that lets you break out of the monotony of the fighter and do a lot more than just swing your sword, shoot your bow, and hold up your big old shield.
So this has been a look at the Eldritch Knight in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you've played an Eldritch Knight, tell us about how that went in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the generosity of our incredible Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we're doing here, please consider checking us out on Patreon by following the links in the description below or at patreon.com/dungeon_dudes.
And if you want to see an Eldritch Knight in play, make sure to check out the campaigns that we run in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, live on Twitch, Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can find those at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. And you can see all the previous episodes of those shows right up over here.
And we have plenty more guides to the classes and subclasses in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time
In the dungeon.